On to our last speaker of Spikes Asia 2018. So please do give the biggest roar you've done over the last 3 days. Let's see how loud you can make it. And this speaker believes that with the arrival of augmented reality on most phones, we're facing a once-in-a-generation opportunity to redefine how we engage with users. So please give a big roaring round of applause to Google's Global Head of Creative for AR and VR Advertising, Matthieu Lorrain.
Hello guys, I'm Matt. So yes, I was at Google. I've been at Google for about 10 years. And I'm French, as you can hear, but I'm based in New York City. And for 7 years, I was part of a team called The Zoo. Maybe you heard about it. It's a creative team working with brands and agencies. And for the last 6 months, actually, I've been working in a different team. I ran the product side, and I'm part of the augmented reality and virtual reality team. And so in that new team, my job is to try to understand how we're going to be able to use augmented reality in the next 10 years to engage with consumers and to create new services, to create new experiences. So how many people here know what is augmented reality? Don't be shy. I see just a few arms, not everybody. What we call augmented reality is pretty much a technology that allows us to mix digital and physical, that allows you to add a layer of information on top of the reality. And you can use that for art, you can use that for telling stories, you can use that for utility. It's pretty exciting all the kind of things you can do with that. And it's a very big deal for us because the way we see augmented reality at Google, we think that's pretty much the next computing wave. If you think about the different ways we had the internet in the 90s, we had mobile starting in 2007, 2006, and the next wave is going to be immersive computing. And it's going to take time, but it's going to change dramatically the way we engage with our physical environment. And I've been doing actually augmented reality for several years. My first projects were like 5 years ago. But after joining the product team, what I realized is that we are very early. It is really, really, really early. We are like at the almost like the prehistory of that technology. And a way to think about it is to think that pretty much it's a bit similar to that being in 98, with the internet. So we're back to the 90s, We had the internet at the time. It's a whole new thing. It's exciting. And people need to decide, OK, what do we do with that? How do we engage with consumers? How do we tell stories? Everything was, a blank canvas, and people had to start creating things. And we've seen the best. I think the best was stuff like Flash creativity, people creating very cool websites, very cool experiences. But we also have seen at the time the worst. And the worst is probably that, pop-up ads. How many people hate pop-ups? So I see a few people who don't raise their arms. Probably should have a talk after. Pop-up ads are probably the worst of advertising. It's probably the worst. It's interrupting people. It's annoying. It's invading them. This is really bad. And that's the kind of things we've seen with internet at the time. And if you think about augmented reality, we start to have a sense of how things could go very wrong also. What you see here is a movie called Hyperreality that was created by a designer called Keiichi Matsuda. And it's all CGI, but it shows you pretty much what could be the future in a world where you have always-on information. And it's very dystopian. It shows you a world where you have like pop-ups everywhere, your visual space is being invaded, everything is gamified, so it's very manipulative. It's bad. It's kind of dark. So we know what we don't want to do, but we don't necessarily know yet what we want to do. And that's pretty important. Because if you think about AR, today most of the augmented reality experiences are with your phone. We call that mobile AR. So if you have an Apple, an iPhone, for example, you can just take your phone and certain apps allows you to look around and add content. But the long-term vision is not about a phone. The long-term vision is about glasses. We're not sure if it's going to take 5 or 10 years, but that's pretty much where we think behaviors are going to go, always on augmented reality. And now think how bad it would be if you had pop-up ads in your face. It's much worse than a screen. At least you can turn off your screen, but if you have glasses, you don't have stuff popping up. So part of what I've been doing with my team and what we're doing now is try to figure out, okay, how can we use these few years where we have mobile AR to kind of learn and create the right experiences before, we're moving to that much more, invasive in a way, kind of glasses experience. So first, let's start with the foundations. The first thing where we are thinking in terms of brand engagement and expenses is we think it's important really to make sure that the expenses are not a tax on the user attention. Interruption marketing just doesn't work anymore. We're seeing all the studies shows that Gen Z hates that kind of things. They are open to brand expenses, but they don't want to be interrupted. And so when we are thinking in terms of augmented reality, we're thinking really in terms of how you bring value. How do you provide either delight and utility in a way that feels worthwhile for your consumers? The second principle is this idea that augmented reality is not an all or nothing experience. Meaning that pretty much, it's not like, okay, it's either AR or it's not. There are different degrees, different gradient of how you can bring augmented reality into your work. It can be either like a full experience. Here's an example of an app you can download today. It's a crime scene game, and you can just look around in your room. And with augmented reality, you can try to find cues, and understand who is pretty much the criminal. Or augmented reality can be part of bigger user flow. What you see here is the eBay app. Works pretty well. You don't need augmented reality to buy stuff. You don't need an AR catalog necessarily. However, eBay has identified a very specific problem that they solve with AR. And that's about the size of your parcel. If you sell something to someone else, you don't necessarily know what should be the size of the box. And AR here can help. And so that's the only place where they're using AR is for that very specific problem. The third foundational principle of AR for us is this idea that you don't want to use AR for the sake of it. I mean, that's a principle we apply to any kind of technology. We don't want to use tech for the sake of it. The same with AR. If you can do something today with 2D, you should do it in 2D, and you should only use AR if you have a real value. It's what I call the 2D test. Here you're seeing two examples from the same app. That's Google Maps. And on the left, you have a very simple, classic behavior. It's probably something you had before, which is, okay, I want to find a location. I want to have choice. And so I want to look at a map where I'm going to understand pretty much where are the different locations where I can find what I want. 2D is great for that. We don't need AR. But on the right side, that's something we announced recently, you can actually use AR more for navigation. And I think that's a classic use case of like you're out of the subway, out of the train, you arrive in a neighborhood, and you try to understand where you should go. Should you go left, right? I think we all had that experience of being a little lost, And that's a good example where 2D doesn't translate well in 3D, but it's an example where AR actually can help you to understand where to navigate in space, and then it's justified. So these were like just a few very simple foundations. Now, a lot of what we're doing with my team is to try to understand now from a creative standpoint, when does it make sense to use AR? How do you create great augmented reality experiences that make sense, that justify, and then bring value? So I'm going to share with you a bunch of creative territories. And it is a result of pretty much 5 years of work I've been leading on AR. It's not exhaustive. I'm sure I'm missing a few things. That's kind of how we are thinking and approaching AR. And that's kind of the creative framework we're using in our day-to-day. So the first most obvious use case is around visualizing in context. That's the simplest way of using AR. Today we're seeing apps, for example, IKEA, where you can visualize a sofa in your living room before buying it. You can see pretty much how that piece of furniture is going to look in your environment before buying that thing. The retailer Lowe's in the US also using AR to actually see if an appliance is going to fit in your kitchen. That's a real problem they have. The return rates are very high. It's complicated, it's expensive. But if you can know exactly, measure exactly with AR, how things are going to fit in your kitchen, it's going to be much helpful. So pretty much you can bring anything to you with augmented reality. You can visualize things instead of describing them. That applies to food also. Here's a project built by Google in Germany with a retailer called Rewe. And it's a very simple example of like, how can I visualize, the quantity of different ingredients when I want to cook food. So you have like the main meal. I feel like there's still some progress to do on the 3D. I don't think it's that yummy yet. But you pretty much then can see, the breakdown of all the different ingredients before, preparing your meal. You can do that with objects. But you can also do that with people. So that is a prototype I developed with my team about 3 years ago. And we use a technology called volumetric video. So we took like 2 actors in a studio with a big green screen, 65 cameras, and we filmed them, and that's the result. So it's not 3D, it's not CGI. We really filmed these people. And as you can see with augmented reality, we're able to blend them with reality. So able to, you could visualize a mannequin, visualize a coach, a yoga teacher, a celebrity, all the kind of stories you see today on the screen. Think about how you're going to be able to visualize them in your environment. Think about how a spokesperson could come to life, for example, around you. And that same idea of bringing things to life, we also played with out-of-home and billboards and tried to play with that. So that is another project we showed in Cannes this year that I worked on, where we worked with Ogilvy Chicago, and that was for the shoe shine brand Kiwi. Kiwi had a very successful campaign called Portrait Recomposed, where they tried to think about what could be the shoes of famous self-portraits. And we're like, well, that's really cool. How can we put that further, bring that further? And so we decided to really bring to life the whole poster. And as you can see here, Van Gogh will just pop out, and he's like real size. So it's very cool to have like a Van Gogh just in front of you. And you can swipe the shoes. And as you swipe the shoes, you see, of course, the different products matching it. But also, we change your whole environment. So if he has like boat shoes, you have like sand and small crabs around. And if he has like sneakers, as you can see here, you have like pedestrian sign and also a fixie bike. So that's pretty much the simplest use case. Bring anything that doesn't exist in your environment to visualize it. The second most obvious use case we see a lot is this idea of being able to transform yourself. This idea that you can be something else, you can be someone else. That is very helpful for self-expression. That is also very helpful for trying things, trying glasses or jewelry. And that's probably also, I think, the biggest use case in terms of behaviors today in the US. And for a simple reason, which is that it's very broadly distributed already. So Snapchat, Facebook, and other companies have been the first to do that. It's very common today, and I know in China also it happens a lot, this ability to just like apply lens on your face. And what's very interesting for me is not just this idea of having a mask or a lens. What interests me is more this idea that your face becomes an interface. Your face becomes a canvas to tell stories, to change yourself for sure, to try things, but also it becomes a controller. You can control things with your face. If you open your mouth, if you are raising your eyebrows, if you're just moving around, changing your gaze, all of that can be used as a joystick for games. So here you see a video, it's actually from Snapchat. And we call that playables, this idea that you can create experiences where you play just by moving your face. I tried the game where you're like raising your eyebrow. It's actually very exhausting. Try like a few times. A third territory is around this idea of revealing the invisible, making the invisible visible. That one is exciting because we live in a multi-dimensional world. There's like the most obvious dimension is like the sensitive dimension, what we hear, what we see, what we smell. Then there's the emotional dimension, the memories we have, good and bad, places where we have good memories, places we had something terrible to happen. There's a cultural dimension, and then there's a data dimension. The world is full of data, geolocalized data. Tweets, Instagram pictures, city data, traffic data, pollution data, all of that is around us in a virtual way, but we don't see it. And that's what's interesting with augmented reality, is that ability to actually reveal all that data, all that information that is around us, so then you can visualize it in context. You can match the physical world around you with that data in a way that is much more useful. Think about being able to visualize a subway underground. As you're walking in the streets, you could suddenly, see the lines and see where all the subway, it's almost like the X-ray vision. Or think about being able to visualize the flight path. So here's like a project I worked on a few years ago. It's another prototype from Google, where we try to push that idea of like, what if we could reveal all the invisible roads in the sky? All these invisible tracks that are there, that are, traveling around the world, connecting your city to a lot of places. Well, what if you could visualize them and understand a little more where it's going, where it's coming from, and why not maybe buy a ticket? Or maybe why not have a snapshot of where it's going? Another example, of revealing the invisible here is something created by a British developer. He posted that on Twitter a few months ago. And it's interesting here because he's pretty much showing the time dimension. That's another dimension you can reveal. So what he did is he went to a very cool graffiti spot. And graffiti spots, famous spots, have really, days after days, people keep adding layers of painting and they keep painting on top of the others. And he took these pictures day after days and he then created an augmented reality experience where you can visualize that in context. So as you can see here, you can really suddenly see the whole history of that location. That's kind of things you could do in Singapore. That's a city that changed a lot in 30 years. A lot of architecture change, a lot of urbanism change. And you could imagine, using augmented reality to reveal these different layers, to reveal these different phases and sequences, So one of the key principles of AR is that we're bridging digital and physical. Is that we are finally leaving the screen and reconnecting, all that digital life we have with all the physical world where we spend most of our lives, And that is, personally, is probably the most exciting thing because that's pretty much the idea that every single location becomes a playground. Every single place. Your bedroom, your living room, the streets, your office, all these places now can be transformed, can become, a canvas. And they are unique canvas, which is interesting from a storytelling standpoint, because it means that you can create experiences that are going to be different based on where you try them. If you try an AR app in your living room, it's not going to look the same or feel the same potentially that if you try it in the middle of the streets or if you try it in a park. So that's exciting for me, that idea that suddenly you can tell stories that in a way are kind of responsive, but instead of adapting to a screen size, now these stories are going to adapt to reality, to your environment, to the physical particularities of that environment. Big challenge for designers. Actually, a lot of thinking is going on right now, like how do you design for all these spaces? But very exciting from a storytelling standpoint, because once again, it means that your experiences are going to change over time, and it's not anymore a unique story. And not only you can use the word as a canvas, but also you can remix it. You can change it. You can create interesting associations and relationships between the physical and digital. So what you see here is an app created by the Creative Lab at Google. It was made in New York City. It's called Just a Line. It's a very simple app. It just does one thing. It can just draw lines. Couldn't be simpler. But just with that simple idea, it shows you all the funny use cases you could imagine when you want to remix a word. Just by combining digital content with physical, you can tell stories. You can change perspectives. You can have fun, obviously. You can even create games. So it's a good example. A few years ago, we even thought about using augmented reality to make music also. What if you could actually create a music experience where the music changed based on the environment around you, the distance of the wall, like the location. That's what I mean by remixing the world. And this idea that the world is a playground is also interesting for us when we think about TV ads. That's still a place where, I think brands invest a lot of money creating all these TV movies, these TV spots. And what if you could actually bring these experiences to you? After watching a TV ad, what if you could bring the whole story in your living room? That's what we tried to do. So that's another project I directed that we showed in Cannes this year, and that was for Perrier, the mineral water company. And Perrier had a new campaign, like a new TV campaign for a new product called Perrier juice, sorry. And the idea was pretty much like adding fruits flavors to Perrier. The TV ad was kind of classic, you have a very beautiful guy, a very beautiful girl, they're having fun in Brooklyn, and they drop, a little Perrier on the floor, and all of the drop, you have like a huge vine that starts growing in the city, and at the end of this vine, you have these fruits. So I think you understand the analogy, the metaphor. Water becomes the vines, become the fruits. I'm sure you get it. And so what we decided is like, what if you could actually recreate the exact same experience in your living room? So that's what you see here. It's a little inspired also by Just a Line, so you can pretty much draw, kind of like control the vine. We had to put some limits to how much you can control it so people don't draw horrible stuff. But still, you can kind of manipulate it, and you can do that around you in your environment, and at the end, reveal the fruits. So actually, I called that talk Right-Click the Word, and there's a reason why. It's because I think that's probably the vision, for the next 10 years of how, augmented reality is going to change how we interface with the world. And at Google, we call ourselves an AI-first company. We're using AI and machine learning every day to improve pretty much every single product we have. When you're using Google Search, if you use Google Search, it's powered by AI. If you are, watching video on YouTube, the way we are labeling videos, it's using AI. To use Google Photo, the way also, we can kind of break down your photos into different categories is also using AI. So AI is everywhere in what we're doing. And AI is very good at one thing. AI is really good at recognizing objects in pictures. For many years, it was a very difficult problem, but now we can do that. So we can recognize this is a cat, this is a dog, this is the Empire State Building. Now, when you combine that with augmented reality, it pretty much creates superpower, new superpower. And if you think today about digital, or screens, or mobile phone, or computers, we have these superpowers of being able to manipulate information very easily. We can right-click things, we can save things, we can search. We just have a lot of flexibility and fluidity in how we manipulate information, but we don't have that yet in the physical world. And that's pretty much what I'm talking about here, is thinking about all the things you do today with a screen, all this, easiness of manipulating information, being able to do the same with our physical environment, and being able to manipulate and make sense of that environment. So here's a very simple prototype that we showed recently. It's not from my team, but it's from a twin team, or a sister team, I should say. And it shows you, what I'm talking about in terms of technology. And what you see here is an augmented reality experience that recognizes things and then just apply in AR a label to it. Very simple. It's in French, but it pretty much says food when it sees a banana. Then it sees, the coffee cup. He recognizes the coffee cup, and it's a drink. And of course, he also recognizes, and they say, oh, it's a flat plant. So being able to recognize things and attach things to it is what will allow us to right-click the world. And it's a very big deal for Google. We're a search engine, but until now, the way you search things was by typing queries. Well, what we're talking about here is about being able to search now the world visually. You change the inputs. It's not anymore text. It's not voice. It's visual. So what you see here is a product we already launched. We are in the early days. It's available on most of the new Android phones, and also you can actually access it on iPhone if you have Google Photo. And it's called Google Lens. And the idea of Google Lens is pretty much the ability to search the physical world around you. We call that visual search. The ability to look at someone's style and shop the look. You want to say, hey, I want the same trousers. I look at it, and then it will give you a recommendation. The ability to look at a poster, a movie poster, and just search for it, and it will show you maybe the trailer, or it will show you where actually you can watch the movie. These are like the very simple use cases that exist today, but I let you imagine all the use cases we could invent together in the future by just pointing at something, recognizing what it is, and then creating an action. An action that could be 2D, or an action that could be also 3D. Think about using a banana as a trigger for a story, and maybe you have a gorilla appearing every single time you search for a banana. That's the kind of things I'm talking about here. So if you can right-click the world, you can also probably make it much more interactive. And I think that's interesting because even if we live in a world that is very connected, more and more objects are connected, we still live in a world where most of the things are not, by definition, connected and not interactive. And I think that's one thing augmented reality can do also, is actually to bring this life to these objects. And that's a concept very interesting for me, because if you look at culture, there are many cultures where actually people tend to project life or spirits into objects. In Japan, I'm sure there's a few Japanese here, there's something called kani, like the spirits, and they see spirits in trees or in mountains, in rocks. There are animist culture who are doing the same, and ultimately kids are probably the best example. If you look at kids, at least when I was a kid, I had that ability just to kind of like tell stories and give life to a lot of objects and imagine what would be their personalities and turn these objects into characters. Well, that's the kind of things you could imagine also with augmented reality. So here's a simple example, but the basics is to bring to life an image. Packaging, out of home, posters, all these things are markers that actually you could use and add animation to it. And because our phones now understand the world in 3D, it's not just animating the image, but it's also creating now stories that will interact with the physical environment around it. So you see here, there are little characters coming to life, but not only they come to life, but also they start walking on the table. So it's interesting how you have this relationship between that object and the space around it. I think we're in the early days for that, but this is something that is not really augmented reality, but I wanted to share with you. And that's a concept that was developed in Japan, in Tokyo University, by a few researchers. And they call that invoked computing. And the idea of invoked computing is pretty much that you could invoke objects and you could define or redefine what the purpose or what the function of these objects, and augment them and change their purpose. So here you see the researcher, and pretty much what he's doing is showing, he's in a room that is equipped with captors and projectors. It's very experimental, but he's able to turn a pizza box into a computer. Why not, We could do the same the day we have our glasses. You can say, well, I want my pizza box to be a computer. I don't know if it's very practical, but you could. Or you could turn a banana into a phone. So I think that's very exciting, that idea that in a world where we're going to have always an augmented reality, where we're going to be able to recognize things and interact with it, we also will be able to change the function of things. We also will be able to bookmark things, and ultimately we'll be able to apply our own preference. Some people will want to turn the banana into a phone. Some other people may want to turn it into something else. There'll be an option probably in your browser and the kind of things you'll be able to control by yourself. So I told you, when I started that talk, we're in the very, very early days. And it's funny for me because I actually started my career in 2006 working for a telecom company in their digital content division. We're trying to get people to download music. So I was working on that. And at the time, we were really wondering, why would people do that? 2006, downloading music was a terrible experience. You had to be really motivated. It was full of DRM, it was very slow, it was expensive. It was kind of bad. Now if you fast forward 12 years later, we are watching video every day on our mobile phone, we're playing with it, we couldn't live without a mobile phone. And the point I'm making here is that we're pretty much in the same spot today with augmented reality. It feels a little clunky, it requires a lot of motivation, I think, to use these services, but it's because we are still in the very, very early days and we still have a lot of problems to solve. And besides, not interrupting people, not creating pop-up ads, creating the right creative and the right value, there's a bunch of problems we're still trying to solve in the next 5 to 10 years. The first problem is 3D assets. Think about it, in 1998, 2000, brands didn't have digital assets. They didn't have banners, and so they had to create that. And the advertising industry had to create a whole infrastructure to be able to create and manipulate and handle and distribute banners. Well, the same is now going to happen with 3D assets. We need brands to create 3D assets. They, most of the time, don't have them, or they don't know how to create them at scale, or they don't have the economics. Well, if you want augmented reality everywhere, you'll need that. The second thing is we're still waiting for the augmented reality killer app. The one thing you want to use again and again every day because it's so good or it's so helpful. We had that with mobile, We have Uber, we have Google Maps, we have Facebook. There's a lot of examples, maybe your favorite game, Candy Crush. There are a lot of examples of mobile of things people are very, very excited about. I don't think we have yet that for augmented reality. Still to be created. A third very difficult problem to solve is around mapping the physical space. Because if you want to be able to leave things around you, maybe for other people to find them, you need to know exactly where you are. And GPS is not enough for that. GPS is not precise enough. No, you need a really good map of your environment. Understand, in a supermarket where you are exactly, if you're in front of the tomato sauce or if you're in front of the pasta. It's not the same, right? Well, that's kind of things we need to do, is mapping that space. And finally, and I think that's probably going to be one of the hardest problems, is we also, if the vision is, glasses, always on AR, hand-free, you will need glasses people want to wear. I'm sure a lot of you remember the Google Glass experiment. And I don't think we call that a success, but we learned a lot. And something we learned is the psychological impact. People didn't want to wear glass for a lot of psychological reasons. And people are getting LASIK surgery because they don't want to wear glass. So how would you convince people to wear glass? Not even talking about the hardware, the battery life, the performance. All of that, these are very hard problems we need to solve for that next computing wave to happen. Now, in the short term, I think we all have a responsibility, in that room and beyond. And I think the advertising industry has a responsibility, which is, I started my talk with that. We don't want to be the one creating the pop-up ads of the future. We, in a world where you're going to be able to merge physical and digital, in a world where we're going to live, beyond screens and have digital living beyond screens, our responsibility is obviously to think about what are the good examples, what are the healthy, positive ways we can use augmented reality, and how do we make sure that that kind of things doesn't happen, that, unhealthy gamification and manipulation, intrusive advertising, manipulative messages, how do we find a way to avoid that is kind of the open question for all of us. Now that's it for me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. So he's going to head off for the Meet the Speakers session, so do go ahead and meet Matt.